What if the life you're about to give up on is actually one small decision away from changing everything? This is my real story in the United States, where love felt fragile, words felt impossible, and silence almost cost me everything. But something unexpected happened when I stopped trying to be perfect and started being honest. Stay with me, because the moment I almost quit became the moment everything finally began. Dreams felt impossible. What if the reason you feel stuck right now isn't because you're not good enough, but because you've been trying to survive a life that was never meant to feel easy in the first place? I used to think the problem was me, that I wasn't smart enough, not fast enough, not good enough to fit into life in the United States. But the truth is, no one tells you that some dreams, when you finally touch them, don't shine the way you imagined. They feel heavy, quiet, and sometimes they make you want to turn back. One very ordinary morning, I sat in my kitchen, watching sunlight fall through the window. Everything looked peaceful, almost too peaceful, like a scene that didn't quite belong to me. The coffee machine hummed softly, and one thought kept repeating in my mind. Why does everything feel so hard? Do you know that feeling? When nothing is obviously wrong, but something deep inside you knows something isn't right. It's not a big crisis, not a dramatic moment, just a quiet pattern of days that all feel the same, and slowly, you start losing your sense of control. My life in the U.S. right now isn't a movie dream. There's no background music.
No constant bow moments.
Instead, it's made of short conversations, small misunderstandings, and silences that last a little longer than they should. I remember one time, the person I love asked me a simple question. Are you okay? And I answered, I'm fine. But the truth was, I wasn't okay at all. Here's something people don't often tell you. You can say the right words and still fail to express what you really feel. You can understand the vocabulary, but not understand the heart of the person in front of you. Your brain, according to science, is wired to save energy. It prefers what is familiar. So when you're in a new environment, new culture, new habits, new ways of communicating, everything becomes unknown. And your brain starts to overload. You feel tired not because you're weak. You feel tired because you're processing too much at once. Some days, I felt like a low-battery version of myself. I listened, but didn't fully understand. I spoke, but didn't truly connect. And the worst part was, I started to doubt myself. Maybe I'm just not made for this life. That sentence showed up in my mind more times than I want to admit. But what made everything even harder wasn't work, wasn't the environment. It was the feeling that I was slowly drifting away from the person I loved. We lived in the same house, ate the same meals, but between us there was an invisible distance. No big arguments.
No dramatic scenes.
Just shorter conversations, fewer eye contacts, and those moments when you don't know what to say next. It sounds small, right? But those small things add up. Psychology calls this micro-disconnection, tiny breaks in everyday communication. Studies show that these small, repeated moments are often what slowly weaken a relationship, not the big fights. And I was right in the middle of it without even realizing. One evening, we sat across from each other. The TV was on, but neither of us was really watching. I remember thinking, say something. But I said nothing. Because in my head, every sentence sounded wrong. Here's the part no one talks about. When you're not confident in how you communicate, you start choosing silence. And silence, at first, feels safe. But over time, it becomes distance. You don't say the wrong thing. But you also don't say anything right. I used to think that to live well in the U.S., I needed perfect English. But later I realized it was never about perfect English. It was about this. Do you have the courage to say what you truly feel? A simple sentence like, I feel tired today.
Sounds easy.
But to say it honestly is not easy at all, because it requires you to admit that you're not okay. And sometimes that's harder than learning a new language. You can learn vocabulary in a few months, but learning how to open your heart can take years. I didn't realize I was slowly shutting down, not in a dramatic way, not like in movies, but in a very real, everyday way, talking less, smiling less, and living on autopilot. Wake up,
Eat. Work. Smile. Repeat.
sound familiar? And then one day, you look at yourself and wonder, when did I stop feeling like me? That's the moment when a dream starts to feel heavy. Not because it's wrong, but because you've been carrying it alone. If you're watching this and something inside you feels touched, maybe you're in a similar place to where I once was. That space where you don't really want to give up, but you also don't know how to keep going. And here's the most important thing I want you to remember in this part.
You don't need to have all the answers right now.
You just need to be honest with yourself a little bit. Because sometimes the moment you admit, this feels impossible, is exactly the moment your real story begins. An ordinary day, real pressure. What if the most exhausting part of your life isn't what you do, but what you hide? Not the big struggles, not the obvious problems, but the quiet pressure of pretending you're okay when you're not. My day usually starts the same way. The alarm goes off, and for a few seconds, everything feels normal, peaceful even. But then reality slowly loads like a slow internet connection, and I remember who I need to be today, not who I am,
Who I need to be.
I walk into the kitchen, pour coffee, and rehearse simple sentences in my head. Good morning. Did you sleep well? I'll take care of it. They sound easy, basic, almost too basic. But here's the strange thing. The simpler the sentence, the more pressure I feel. Because simple sentences leave no place to hide. When you use complicated words, people expect mistakes. But when you say something simple, they expect you to mean it,
To feel it. To connect.
and that's where the real pressure begins. There's this invisible expectation in everyday life in the United States, especially in relationships. You're supposed to express clearly, speak directly, say what you feel, use your words.
Sounds easy, right?
But what if your thoughts are faster than your words? What if your feelings are deeper than your vocabulary? That gap, that space between what you feel and what you can say, is where frustration lives. I remember one morning, standing by the sink, staring at nothing. The person I love walked in and smiled. Hey, you seem quiet today. I paused. Not because I didn't understand the sentence. I understood every word, but I didn't know how to respond in a way that felt real. So I said, just a little tired. That was it. That small sentence carried everything I didn't say. I was tired, yes, but not just physically. I was tired of translating my thoughts before speaking. Tired of checking every word in my head before letting it out. Tired of wondering if what I said sounded cold, or wrong, or distant. According to cognitive science, your brain uses more energy when operating in a non-native language. It has to process meaning, structure, emotion all at once. That's why even short conversations can feel exhausting. So no, you're not overreacting. You're just mentally overloaded. But here's the tricky part. From the outside, none of this is visible. You still smile. You still answer. You still function. Which means no one really sees how hard you're trying. And slowly, something starts to change inside you. You begin to simplify yourself. Not because you want to, but because it's easier. You stop telling long stories. You avoid complicated emotions. You choose safe words instead of honest ones.
Ai fine.
It's okay. No problem. These phrases become your shield. And over time, they also become your prison. There's a psychological concept called emotional suppression, when you reduce the expression of your feelings to avoid discomfort. At first, it protects you, but long-term, it creates distance, not just from others, but from yourself. And I didn't notice it happening. Until one moment. It was a normal evening. Nothing special. We were having dinner, and everything looked fine. But something felt off. The conversation was short, mechanical. At one point, there was silence. Not a peaceful silence. A heavy one. And suddenly, the person I love said something that stayed with me. I feel like you're here, but not really here. That sentence didn't sound angry. It sounded tired. And that hit harder than any argument ever could. Because deep down, I knew it was true. I was physically present. I showed up every day. I did everything I was supposed to do. But emotionally, I had been slowly disappearing. And here's the uncomfortable truth. When communication feels hard, your brain looks for shortcuts. Silence is the easiest one.
No mistakes. No misunderstandings.
No risk. But also no connection. You don't build relationships through perfect sentences. You build them through imperfect honesty. And I had been avoiding that. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying that sentence. You're here, but not really here. I realized something I had been ignoring for a long time. The real problem wasn't my English. It was my fear. Fear of saying the wrong thing. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of not being enough. And fear is very good at disguising itself as logic. I'll speak when I'm better. I'll explain when I'm more confident. I'll try when I'm ready. But ready never comes. It just keeps moving further away. So you wait. And while you're waiting, life keeps happening. Conversations keep passing. Moments keep slipping. And the people you love keep feeling the distance, even if they can't explain why. If you've ever felt like this, like you're trying your best but still not fully seen, then you understand how heavy an ordinary day can feel. Because it's not just about what you do. It's about what you don't say. And the longer you hold it in, the harder it becomes to let it out. But here's something I wish I understood earlier. You don't need perfect words to create real connection. You just need real intention. Even a broken sentence can be more powerful than perfect silence. That day didn't change everything immediately. I didn't suddenly become confident. I didn't magically find the right words, but something small shifted. For the first time, I stopped asking, how do I say this perfectly? And started asking, what do I really want to say? And that question changed everything that came next. Because sometimes the pressure isn't in your life. It's in the version of yourself you're trying too hard to maintain. And the moment you let that go, even just a little, you might finally start to feel present again. Not perfect, but real. Right person, wrong timing. Have you ever met someone who felt right, but everything else around you felt completely wrong? Not wrong in a dramatic, movie-like way.
No explosions. No chaos.
Just a quiet mismatch between your heart and your reality. That's how it started for me. It wasn't a big moment. No cinematic music, no slow motion eye contact. Just a normal day in a normal place, with a normal conversation that somehow stayed in my mind longer than it should have. At first, it felt easy. We talked about simple things, food, weather, daily routines. The kind of conversation that doesn't require deep vocabulary or perfect grammar. And for a moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Comfort. Not because I was saying everything right, but because I wasn't afraid of saying it wrong. That feeling? It's rare. Especially when you've been living inside your own head, filtering every word before it leaves your mouth. But here's where things get complicated. Because meeting the right person doesn't mean you're ready for them. And I wasn't. On the outside, everything looked fine. We spent time together. We laughed. We shared small stories. But inside, there was a constant tension. Not between us. Inside me. Every conversation felt like a test I didn't sign up for. Not because the other person was judging me, but because I was judging myself. Did that sound natural? Was that the right word? Did I just make it awkward? You see, when you're not confident in how you communicate, even a simple moment can feel like a performance. And performances are exhausting. There's a concept in psychology called self-monitoring. It means you're constantly observing and adjusting your behavior based on how you think others perceive you. In small doses, it's helpful. But when it becomes constant, it disconnects you from being real. That's exactly what was happening to me. I wasn't fully present in the moment. I was watching myself trying to be good enough in the moment. And love doesn't grow well under that kind of pressure. I remember one afternoon, we were walking outside. The weather was nice, the kind that makes everything feel a little lighter. There was a pause in the conversation. Not uncomfortable, just open. It was the perfect moment to say something real. Something honest. Something that could bring us closer. But instead, I said something safe. Something forgettable. And the moment passed. That's the thing about connection. It doesn't wait. It appears quietly, gives you a chance, and if you hesitate too long, it moves on. Not because it's cruel, but because it's natural.
There were so many moments like that.
Moments where I felt something deep, but said something shallow. Moments where I wanted to open up, but chose to stay guarded. And slowly, I started noticing a pattern. It wasn't that we didn't have connection. It was that I wasn't allowing it to grow. Because growth requires risk. And I was avoiding risk at all costs. Even if that cost was losing something meaningful. Here's the irony. I thought I was protecting the relationship by not making mistakes. But in reality, I was weakening it by not being real. Because people don't connect with perfection. They connect with truth. Even messy, imperfect, slightly broken truth. One evening, we were sitting together, and the conversation turned a little deeper. Nothing too heavy, just more personal. The kind of conversation where you don't need advanced English. You just need honesty. And I froze. Not physically, but mentally. My mind started racing. Say something meaningful. Don't mess this up. Make it sound right. And in the middle of all that noise, I missed the moment. Again. That's when I realized something uncomfortable. It wasn't the language holding me back. It was the pressure I put on myself to be perfect. Because perfection creates distance. It makes you pause. It makes you hesitate. It makes you edit yourself in real time. And while you're editing, the moment is already gone. If you've ever felt like this, like you're one step away from something real but can't quite reach it, then you know how frustrating it is. Because it's not about effort. You're trying. It's about access. You can't fully access what you feel in the moment it matters most. And that creates a strange kind of loneliness, even when you're not alone. But here's the part that changed everything for me. One day, in a very normal conversation, I accidentally said something wrong. Not a big mistake.
Just a small one.
The grammar wasn't perfect. The sentence sounded a little off. And I immediately felt that familiar wave of embarrassment. But something unexpected happened. The other person didn't laugh. Didn't correct me. Didn't react negatively at all. Instead, they understood. Not the sentence.
Me.
And in that moment, something clicked. Connection doesn't require perfect language. It requires shared intention. You don't need to say everything right. You just need to mean what you say. That realization didn't instantly fix everything. I still hesitated. I still overthought. I still had moments where I chose silence. But something inside me shifted. I started allowing small imperfections, small risks, small moments of honesty. And slowly the connection began to feel more real. Not because I became better, but because I became more myself. That's the paradox no one tells you. The more you try to sound perfect, the less real you feel. And the more real you allow yourself to be, the less perfection matters. Looking back, it really was the right person. But the timing? The timing depended on me. On whether I was willing to show up, not as a polished version of myself, but as a human one. Because sometimes the biggest barrier between you and something meaningful isn't the situation. It's the version of yourself you think you need to be to deserve it. And the moment you let go of that, you don't just get closer to someone else. You finally get closer to yourself. Small words, big misunderstandings. What if the biggest damage in your relationship didn't come from what you said wrong, but from what the other person felt you meant? Not your intention, not your grammar, but the invisible meaning behind your words. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. In real life, especially in the United States, people don't just listen to your words. They listen to your tone, your timing, your energy. And if those don't match, even a simple sentence can feel wrong. I learned that the hard way. It started with something small, almost forgettable. One evening, after a long day, the person I love asked me, "Do you want to go out for dinner?" It was a normal question, a kind one, but I was tired, mentally drained. My brain felt like it had been running in a second language all day, translating everything, words, emotions, reactions. So I answered quickly, "It's okay." That was it. 2 simple words. It's okay. In my mind, it meant, I'm tired, but I don't mind. You can decide. Neutral, flexible, easy. But in their mind, it meant something completely different. It sounded like, I don't care. Or worse, I'm not interested in spending time with you. The energy shifted instantly. Not dramatically, not loudly,
but subtly.
And sometimes, subtle shifts are the most dangerous, because you don't notice them until they've already created distance.
We still went out that night.
We still sat at the same table, but something felt off. The conversation was shorter. The eye contact faded faster. And I didn't understand why. That's the frustrating part about misunderstandings. They don't always come with clear explanations. You don't get a notification that says, "Hey, something just went wrong in your relationship." You just feel it. A slight coldness. A small disconnect. A quiet tension that wasn't there before. Psychology calls this emotional misalignment, when the message you send doesn't match the feeling the other person receives. And it happens more often when communication styles are different. In American culture, communication tends to be more direct, but also more emotionally expressive. Words are expected to reflect feelings clearly. So when your words are neutral, they can be interpreted as distant. And I didn't know that. I thought being simple was safe. But sometimes being too neutral creates confusion. Later that night, something unexpected happened. We were back home, and the silence returned. Not the comfortable kind, the heavy one. And then, gently, they asked, "Did I do something wrong?" That question caught me off guard. Because in my mind, nothing was wrong. But clearly, something was. And in that moment, I realized something important. Misunderstandings don't start when people argue. They start when people interpret silence or simplicity in different ways. I tried to explain. "I was just tired," I said. I didn't mean anything. But even as I spoke, I could feel the gap between what I felt and what they experienced. Because explanation comes after the emotion. And by the time you explain, the feeling has already landed. There's a concept in communication psychology called emotional residue. It means that even after you clarify your words, the initial emotional reaction doesn't disappear immediately. So, even if you fix the meaning, the feeling lingers. That's why small misunderstandings can grow into bigger distance over time. Not because people want conflict, but because they slowly stop feeling understood. And here's where it gets even more complicated. When you've already struggled with confidence in communication, moments like this make you retreat even more. After that night, I became more careful, more filtered, more controlled. I started thinking twice before every response. Should I say yes? Should I explain more? Will this sound wrong? And, without realizing it, I was creating even more pressure for myself. Because now, it wasn't just about expressing my thoughts. It was about avoiding mistakes. And when your goal becomes don't mess up, you lose the ability to be natural. Every word feels heavy. Every sentence feels risky. And slowly, communication becomes something you fear instead of something you use to connect. Have you ever felt that? Like you're walking on invisible eggshells, not because the other person is difficult, but because you don't trust your own words? That's where I was. And the irony is, the more I tried to be careful, the more unnatural I sounded. Because real connection doesn't come from perfect control. It comes from emotional clarity. And clarity doesn't mean using complicated words. It means making your feeling visible. For example, instead of saying it's okay, I could have said, I'm really tired today, but I'd still love to go with you. Same situation. Different feeling. One sentence closes the door. The other keeps it open. That's the power of small changes. Not in vocabulary, but in intention. But at that time, I didn't know how to do that yet. I only knew one thing. Something small had created distance. And I didn't know how to fix it without making it worse. That feeling is one of the hardest parts of any relationship. Not the big fights, but the quiet confusion of not knowing where things shifted and whether you can bring it back. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. The question, the answer, the tone. 2 words. It's okay. It felt almost ridiculous that something so small could carry so much weight. But that's how human connection works. It's not built on big moments. It's shaped by small ones. Repeated. Layered.
Felt.
And that's when I realized something I couldn't ignore anymore. If I didn't learn how to express what I truly meant, I wasn't just risking misunderstandings. I was risking the relationship itself. Because silence can be repaired. Mistakes can be forgiven. But feeling misunderstood over and over again? That slowly changes how people feel about you. And how they feel with you. The truth is, I didn't fix everything that night. I didn't suddenly become clear or confident. But I started to notice. Notice the weight of small words. Notice the gap between intention and impact. And most importantly, notice that connection isn't about being perfect. It's about being understood. And if you don't help people understand you, they'll create their own version of what you meant. And that version might not be the one you wanted. Because sometimes the distance between 2 people isn't built by big mistakes. It's built by small sentences left unexplained. When you want to quit. What if the moment you feel like giving up isn't the end of your story, but the exact point where your real story is asking to begin? Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly in the way you stop trying. There's a kind of exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix. Not physical tiredness. Not the kind you feel after a long day. I'm talking about the kind that sits deeper, where even simple things feel heavy. Where speaking feels like effort. Where even caring feels like work. That's where I was. Nothing had exploded. No big fight. No breaking point you could clearly point to. But inside me, something was fading. Do you ever notice how giving up doesn't always look like quitting? Sometimes it looks like this. You still show up. You still respond. You still say, I'm okay. But inside, you've already stepped back. That's the most dangerous version of almost quitting. Because no one sees it. Not even you at first. My days started feeling slower. Not in time, but in energy. Every interaction felt like it required more effort than it should. A simple question felt like pressure. A small conversation felt like a task. And the worst part? I started avoiding moments that used to matter. Not intentionally, just quietly. If there was a chance to talk deeply, I would keep it light. If there was a moment to open up, I would change the topic. If there was a pause that invited honesty, I would fill it with something safe. Because safe felt easier. But safe also meant distant. There's a concept in behavioral psychology called learned avoidance. When something feels uncomfortable, like expressing yourself in a way you're not confident about, your brain starts avoiding it to protect you. At first, it feels like relief. But over time, it becomes a habit. And habits shape your life more than decisions do. Without realizing it, I had built a habit of holding back. Not because I didn't care, but because caring felt risky. Because every time I tried to express something real, there was a chance it would come out wrong. Be misunderstood.
Feel awkward.
So my brain did what it thought was smart. Let's not do that. And just like that, I started disappearing from my own life. Have you ever felt like that? Like you're physically present, but emotionally somewhere else? Like you're watching your own life happen instead of fully living it? That's what quiet quitting feels like. Not dramatic. Just distant. There was one night I remember clearly. We were sitting together again. Another normal evening. Another quiet space between words. And I felt it. That urge. The one that whispers. This is too hard. Maybe this isn't for you. Maybe you should stop trying. It didn't sound like fear. It sounded like logic. And that's what makes it dangerous. Because when your mind presents quitting as something reasonable, you start believing it. I remember looking down, avoiding eye contact, and thinking, what if I just stay like this? What if I don't try to fix anything? What if I just keep things simple? No risk.
No mistakes.
No pressure. But also, no growth. No connection. No real feeling. And that's when something uncomfortable hit me. If I kept going like this, nothing would break immediately. But slowly, everything meaningful would fade. That's the trap. Giving up doesn't always destroy your life. Sometimes it just makes your life smaller. Less expressive. Less connected. Less alive. And the scariest part? You get used to it. Your brain adapts. It lowers expectations. It tells you, this is enough. This is fine. But deep down you know it's not. There's a quiet voice that doesn't go away. The one that says, this isn't who you are. I tried to ignore that voice. For days. Maybe weeks. But it kept coming back. Not loudly. Just consistently. And then something happened that made it impossible to ignore anymore. It wasn't a big event. No dramatic scene. Just a small moment that hit at the wrong time, or maybe the right time. The person I love said something simple. I miss how you used to talk to me. That was it.
No accusation. No anger.
Just honesty. And for some reason, that hurt more than anything else. Because I knew exactly what they meant. They didn't miss my English. They missed me, the version of me that tried, that expressed, that showed up, even imperfectly. And I realized something I had been avoiding. In trying to protect myself from feeling uncomfortable, I had stopped giving something important to the relationship. My presence. Not just being there physically, but being there emotionally. That moment didn't fix everything. But it broke the illusion that doing nothing was safe. because doing nothing was actually doing something. It was slowly creating distance. And once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it. That night, I didn't suddenly become confident. I didn't have a perfect plan. But for the first time in a long time, I felt something different. Not motivation, not excitement, something quieter. Responsibility. Not the heavy kind, the honest kind, the kind that says, this matters, and you're part of it. And maybe that's where real change begins. Not when you feel ready, not when you feel confident, but when you stop pretending that giving up is easier, because it's not. It just feels easier at the beginning. So if you're at that point right now where part of you wants to stop trying, just know this. That feeling doesn't mean you're weak. It means you've been trying for longer than people can see. But here's the question that changed everything for me. What if instead of asking, should I quit? You ask, what's one small thing I can do differently? Not everything, just one thing. Because sometimes you don't need a big comeback. You just need a small shift. And that small shift might be enough to bring you back to yourself. Because the moment you feel like quitting might actually be the moment you're closest to something real. The moment that shifted everything. What if the turning point in your life doesn't arrive as a big opportunity, but as a small moment you almost ignore? No dramatic music. No life-changing speech. Just a quiet situation that asks something simple from you. And you either respond differently, or you repeat the same pattern again. For me, it happened on a very normal day. No special plan. No important event. Just another routine that looked exactly like every other day I had been living, which is why I almost missed it. The morning started slow. That familiar heaviness was still there, sitting quietly in the background of everything I did. I moved through my day the same way I had been for weeks, efficient, polite, distant. Say the right things. Avoid the wrong ones. Stay safe. By that point, I had become very good at that. Too good. Because when you get used to protecting yourself, you forget how to show yourself. And then something small happened. It wasn't a big conversation. It wasn't even planned. We were in the kitchen again. Same place where so many quiet thoughts had passed through my mind. The person I love was doing something simple, preparing food, moving around, just being present in a way that felt calm. And then they said something. Not serious. Not emotional. Just a simple sentence. Can you tell me how you're really feeling today? That word really did something. It broke through the routine. Because usually, I had an automatic answer ready. I'm fine. I'm okay. Just a little tired. But this time, I paused. Not the usual pause where I search for the safest sentence. A different kind of pause. The kind where you realize you're about to make a choice. And for some reason, in that quiet second, something inside me said, don't do the same thing again. That thought wasn't loud. But it was clear. And for the first time in a long time, I listened. My brain immediately reacted. No, don't say too much. Keep it simple. Don't make it awkward. That's how your mind protects you. It tries to keep you inside what's familiar, even if what's familiar is not working. But something felt different. Because now I was aware of it. I could see the pattern. And once you see a pattern clearly, you have a chance to break it. So instead of choosing the safe answer, I chose something slightly uncomfortable. Not dramatic. Not perfect. Just honest. I feel tired, but not just physically. I think I've been holding a lot in. The sentence wasn't smooth. It wasn't impressive. But it was real. And then something unexpected happened. Nothing bad. No awkward reaction.
No confusión.
Just silence. But this time it felt different. Not heavy. Not distant. Just open. And then they responded, gently. I didn't know that. That's it.
No judgment. No correction.
Just understanding. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. Because I realized something I had been missing this whole time. People don't expect you to be perfect. They expect you to be real. All the pressure I had been carrying, the need to say everything correctly, clearly, perfectly, was something I had created, not something that was required. And that realization felt freeing. There's a concept in psychology called cognitive reframing. It means changing the way you interpret a situation, which then changes how you feel and act. Before that moment, I saw communication as a test, a performance where I had to get everything right. After that moment, I started seeing it differently, as a bridge. Something imperfect, but enough to connect. And that changes everything. Because when something is a test, you try to avoid mistakes. But when something is a bridge, you try to cross it. Even if it's shaky, even if it's not perfect. That small shift created space for something new. Not confidence, not suddenly, but willingness. Willingness to try again. Willingness to say a little more. Willingness to risk being slightly misunderstood in exchange for being more real. That day didn't turn me into a different person. I still hesitated. I still overthought. But now, there was a crack in the old pattern. And once a pattern cracks, it can't hold you the same way anymore. Later that evening, I noticed something subtle. The conversation felt easier. Not because my English improved overnight, but because I wasn't trying to control every word. I let some sentences be imperfect. I let some pauses exist. And strangely, that made everything feel more natural. That's the paradox. The more you try to control communication, the less natural it becomes. The more you allow imperfection, the more connection grows. And that's when I understood something important about life in the United States, especially in relationships. It's not about saying more. It's about saying what matters, even if it's simple, even if it's not perfect, because clarity beats complexity. Every time. Looking back, that moment could have easily been ignored. I could have said, "I'm fine." I could have stayed in the same pattern. Nothing dramatic would have happened, but nothing would have changed either. And sometimes, the difference between staying stuck and moving forward is just one honest sentence. One small decision. One moment where you choose truth over comfort. So, if you're waiting for a big breakthrough, you might miss it. Because real change doesn't always announce itself. It shows up quietly, in a question, in a pause, in a chance to respond differently. And the question is never, "Are you ready?" The real question is, will you choose differently this time? Because that one choice might be the moment everything starts to shift. Small changes, real growth. What if the life you're trying to fix doesn't need a big transformation, but just a few small changes you've been underestimating? Not a new personality. Not perfect communication. Just small shifts repeated consistently. After that moment in the kitchen, I didn't wake up the next day as a completely different person. I didn't suddenly become confident. I didn't start speaking fluently without hesitation. I didn't magically understand everything better, but something subtle had changed. I stopped trying to be impressive and started trying to be honest. That sounds simple, right? But in real life, it changes everything. Because when your goal is to sound impressive, you focus on performance. But when your goal is to be honest, you focus on connection. And connection doesn't require perfection. It requires presence. The next few days were interesting, not in a big, exciting way, but in a quiet, almost experimental way. I started noticing moments, small ones, where I usually stayed silent or chose the safest response. And instead of avoiding them, I leaned in, just a little. One morning, instead of saying, "I'm fine," I said, "I didn't sleep well last night."
Simple. Real.
Slightly uncomfortable. But something shifted. The conversation didn't end there. It continued. That's when I realized something powerful. Honesty creates space. Even small honesty. Because when you give people something real, they have something real to respond to. Before, my conversations were like closed doors. Polite.
Clean.
Safe. But closed. Now, they were slightly open. Not wide open. But enough for connection to enter. There's a principle in behavioral science called microhabits. It means small actions, repeated over time, create lasting change more effectively than big, inconsistent efforts. And that's exactly what this became for me. Not a big plan. Not a dramatic change. Just small adjustments. Repeated. Every day. I started doing something very simple. Instead of asking, how do I say this perfectly? I asked, what's the simplest true version of what I feel? And that question made everything easier. Because simplicity removes pressure. You don't need advanced vocabulary to say, I feel tired. I feel a little stressed. I need a moment. These are basic sentences. But they carry emotional clarity. And emotional clarity is what builds trust. Another small change I made was this. I stopped correcting myself in real time. Before, if I made a mistake, even a small one, I would immediately try to fix it, rephrase it, adjust it. And that created a strange effect. It broke the flow. It made conversations feel unnatural. So, I tried something different. If I made a small mistake, I let it go. And something surprising happened. Most of the time, it didn't matter. People still understood. The conversation still moved forward. The connection didn't break. That's when I realized. Perfection isn't what keeps a conversation alive. Flow is. And flow comes from letting things move, even if they're not perfect. There was another moment that stood out. We were talking about something simple, plans for the weekend. Before, I would have kept it short, neutral, safe. But this time, I added something small. I'd really like to spend more time together this weekend. That sentence wasn't complicated, but it was intentional. And intention changes how words feel. The response was immediate, warmer, more engaged, more present. And I felt it. That small shift in energy. That's when I understood something deeper. Connection grows in the space between what is said and what is felt. And the more aligned those two things are, the stronger the connection becomes. But here's the important part. None of this felt easy at first. Every small change required awareness. Every honest sentence required a bit of courage. Because when you've been used to protecting yourself, even small openness feels like risk. There were moments I wanted to go back. To be safe again. To be quiet. To avoid the effort. And sometimes, I did. I slipped back into old habits. Short answers. Minimal expression. Emotional distance. But now I noticed it. And that awareness made it harder to stay there. Because once you've experienced real connection, even briefly, you don't want to go back to empty conversations. That's how growth works. Not in a straight line, but in cycles. Forward, backward, forward again. And over time, the forward moments become more frequent. Another thing I started doing was listening differently. Before, I listened to respond, to find the right words, to keep the conversation going. But now, I listen to understand, not just the words, but the feeling behind them. And that changed how I responded. Instead of trying to say something correct, I started saying something relevant. And relevance feels more human than correctness. This is something many people don't realize about communication in the U.S. It's not about sounding perfect. It's about being emotionally clear and present. You can have simple English and still create deep connection. If your intention is clear. if your attention is real. And slowly, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not confidence, not fully, but comfort. Comfort in being slightly imperfect. Comfort in not having all the right words. Comfort in just showing up as I am. And that comfort made everything lighter. Conversations felt less like tasks, more like moments, less like pressure, more like presence. Looking back, none of these changes were big.
No dramatic breakthrough. No sudden transformation.
Just small choices, made differently, repeated daily. And that's the part most people overlook. They wait for motivation, for confidence,
For the right time.
but real change doesn't wait for that. It starts with small actions, taken before you feel ready. So, if you're watching this and thinking, I can't change everything right now,
Good.
you don't have to, because you don't need everything to change. You just need one moment, one sentence, one small shift, and then repeat. Because sometimes the life that feels impossible doesn't need to be rebuilt. It just needs to be adjusted, one honest moment at a time. Marriage isn't just love. What if love isn't the hardest part of a relationship? What if the real challenge begins after love, when life starts asking for more than feelings? More patience, more responsibility, more understanding on the days you don't feel like giving it. Because here's something no one really explains clearly. Love can bring two people together, but daily life is what tests whether they stay. And in the United States, that test feels different in ways you don't always expect. Not harder, just different. After we got deeper into our relationship, everything started to shift. Not suddenly, but gradually. The small moments became more important. The daily routines became more visible. And I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. Living together isn't about big romantic gestures. It's about small, repeated interactions every single day. Who cooks? Who cleans?
Who speaks up?
Who stays quiet? And more importantly, how you communicate through all of it. At first, I thought love would carry everything. That as long as we cared about each other, things would work out naturally. But real life doesn't work like that. Because love doesn't automatically solve misunderstanding. It doesn't remove stress. It doesn't teach you how to communicate when you're tired, frustrated, or emotionally drained. That part, you have to learn. And learning it, especially in a different cultural environment, can feel overwhelming. There was one evening I remember clearly. We were both tired. Not from anything dramatic, just the weight of a long day. Small things started to matter more. A tone that felt slightly off. A response that felt shorter than usual. A silence that lasted a little too long. Nothing big, but everything noticeable. At one point, a simple discussion about something practical, something small, turned into tension. Not because of the topic, but because of how we were communicating. Or not communicating. I said something short. They responded with something slightly sharper. And just like that, the energy changed. Here's the thing about relationships. Conflict rarely comes from the big issue. It comes from how the issue is expressed. And when you're already tired, already carrying pressure, already trying to manage your thoughts in a second language, that expression becomes harder. There's a cultural difference I started noticing more clearly during moments like this. In the U.S., communication in relationships often values clarity and directness. People are encouraged to say what they feel, to address issues openly, to talk it out. But if you're not used to that style, if your instinct is to stay calm, stay quiet, avoid conflict, then those moments feel intense. Even if they're normal. I remember feeling this internal conflict. Part of me wanted to explain. Part of me wanted to retreat. And for a second,
Il chose silence.
again, Because silence felt safer than saying something wrong. But something had changed in me by then. That old pattern didn't feel as comfortable anymore. Because now I knew what silence could lead to. Distance. So instead of fully shutting down, I did something small. Not perfect, but intentional. I said, I think I need a moment, but I don't want to avoid this. That sentence wasn't strong. It wasn't impressive, but it was honest. And more importantly, it kept the connection open. That's something I started learning about relationships in the U.S. It's not about never having tension. It's about staying connected through it. And connection doesn't mean you solve everything immediately. It means you don't disappear. Emotionally, even when it's uncomfortable, there's a psychological concept called emotional regulation. It's your ability to manage your emotional response without shutting down or reacting impulsively. And here's the key part. Emotional regulation doesn't mean you feel less. It means you respond more intentionally. That night, we didn't solve everything. We didn't have a perfect conversation, but we stayed. We didn't walk away from the moment. And that mattered more than any perfect sentence. Because in long-term relationships, consistency matters more than intensity. It's not about one perfect talk. It's about showing up again and again, even when it's hard. Another thing I started noticing was how responsibility shows up differently in daily life. Not just responsibilities like tasks or schedules, but emotional responsibility, checking in, listening, responding. In many ways, life in the U.S. encourages independence. People value personal space, personal expression, individual needs, and that's a beautiful thing. But it also means you have to actively create connection. It doesn't just happen automatically. You have to choose it every day. And choosing it requires effort, not dramatic effort, just consistent awareness. I started paying more attention to small moments. A short reply that could be expanded. A quiet moment that could become a conversation. A simple thank you that could become appreciation. And those small moments began to build something stronger. Not perfect harmony, but real connection. There's something else I realized about marriage or any serious relationship. It's not about always feeling close. It's about knowing how to come back after distance. Because distance will happen. Misunderstandings will happen. Tired days will happen. But what matters is, do you stay closed or do you find your way back? That's the real skill. Not love, but reconnection. And that skill isn't built in big moments. It's built in small, daily choices. Looking back, I used to think relationships would feel easier over time. But the truth is, they don't get easier. You just get better at handling them. Better at understanding. Better at expressing. Better at staying even when it would be easier to pull away. So, if you're in a place where things feel a little off, a little tense, a little distant, it doesn't mean something is broken. It might just mean something is being tested. And tests aren't there to push you away. They're there to show you what needs to grow. Because love isn't proven when everything feels good. It's revealed when things feel difficult. And the question isn't, do you feel love right now? The question is, are you willing to stay connected even when it's hard? Because that's what turns love into something that lasts. Small wins no one sees. What if the biggest progress in your life is happening in moments no one notices?
No applause. No recognition.
No dramatic change that people can point to and say, that's it. Just small shifts, quiet improvements, invisible victories. And yet those are the ones that change everything. For a long time, I thought progress had to look obvious. Better communication. More confidence. Clear results. Something visible. Something you could measure. But real life, especially in relationships, doesn't always work like that. Sometimes, the most important progress feels almost unnoticeable. After everything that had been happening, I didn't suddenly become a great communicator. I didn't wake up one day and feel completely confident. I still had moments of hesitation, still had sentences that came out wrong, still had days where I felt quiet again. But something subtle was different, and at first, I didn't even realize it, until one small moment made it clear. It was another ordinary day. No special plan. No deep conversation expected. We were just talking, casually, naturally. And at some point, without thinking too much, I said, "I felt a little overwhelmed earlier, but I think I'm okay now." Simple. Not perfect, but real. And the conversation continued smoothly.
No confusión. No awkward pause.
No need to explain too much. Just understanding. And that's when it hit me. That sentence would have been difficult for me before. Not because of the words, but because of what it required. Awareness, honesty, willingness to express. And I had done it naturally, without overthinking. That's progress. Not dramatic, but real. There's a concept in psychology called incremental change. It means small improvements, repeated over time, lead to significant transformation, even if each step feels minor. And the key part? You don't feel it happening while it's happening. You only notice it when you look back. That's why so many people feel stuck. Not because they're not growing, but because they're expecting growth to feel bigger, louder, faster. But real growth is quiet. It happens in how you respond differently in a moment that used to be difficult. It happens in how you stay present when you used to withdraw. It happens in how you say one more honest sentence than you did yesterday. And no one sees that, except you. Another moment made this even clearer. We were having a small disagreement, not serious, just one of those everyday differences in opinion. Before, moments like this would make me tense. Careful, quiet, afraid of saying the wrong thing. But this time, I stayed. Not perfectly calm. Not completely confident. But present. I listened. And instead of trying to avoid the tension, I said, "I think I understand your point, but I feel a little differently." That sentence might sound simple, but it holds something important. It acknowledges the other person without losing yourself. And that balance? It's not easy, especially when you've been used to choosing silence. The response was immediate. Not conflict, not tension, but conversation. Real conversation. That's when I realized something powerful. Progress isn't about eliminating difficulty. It's about handling difficulty differently. Before I avoided. Now I engaged. Before I stayed silent. Now I stayed present. And those small shifts changed the entire experience. There's another layer to this that most people don't talk about. When you start improving, even in small ways, your mind doesn't always celebrate it. It often ignores it, because your brain is wired to notice problems more than progress. It focuses on what's missing, not what's improving. So, even when you're doing better, you might still feel like you're not enough. That's why it's important to recognize your own small wins. Not in an exaggerated way, but in an honest way, like saying, "That was better than before. That felt more real. I handled that differently." Because those acknowledgments reinforce growth. Without them, progress feels invisible. And when progress feels invisible, motivation disappears. I started doing something simple. At the end of the day, I would reflect, not on what went wrong, but on what went slightly better. Even if it was just one moment, one sentence, one response. And slowly, I started seeing a pattern. I wasn't stuck. I was changing. Just not in a way that was obvious. And that changed how I felt about everything. Less pressure. Less frustration. more patience. Because now I wasn't expecting perfection. I was recognizing progress. There's something else I noticed too. The more I allowed myself to see small improvements, the more natural they became. Because confidence doesn't come from big success. It comes from repeated proof that you can handle small moments. And once you trust yourself in small moments, bigger ones feel less intimidating. Looking back, I realized something important. The version of me who felt completely stuck wouldn't even recognize the version of me now. Not because everything changed, but because something inside me shifted. And that shift changed everything else. So if you're watching this and thinking, I'm not improving fast enough, I'm still making mistakes, I still feel unsure, that doesn't mean you're not growing. It might just mean your growth is happening quietly. And quiet growth is still growth. In fact, it's often the most lasting kind. Because it's built on consistency, not pressure, not perfection, just small, honest steps, repeated. So instead of asking, why am I not better yet? Try asking, what am I doing differently now compared to before? And if the answer is even slightly positive, you're moving forward, even if no one else sees it. Because sometimes the most important progress in your life is the kind that doesn't need to be seen. It just needs to be real. Understanding beyond words. What if the real reason you feel disconnected isn't because you don't know enough words, but because you don't yet understand how meaning is built? Not just in language, but in culture, in habits, in the invisible rules people follow without ever explaining them. Because here's something that slowly became clear to me. In the United States, people don't just communicate with words. They communicate with expectations. And if you don't understand those expectations, even clear sentences can feel confusing. For a long time, I thought improving meant learning more vocabulary, more phrases, more correct ways to say things. But even as I improved, something still felt slightly off. Conversations were better, but not always deeper. Smoother, but not always closer. And I couldn't explain why. Until I started paying attention not just to what people said, but how they said it. There was one moment that changed how I saw everything. We were talking about something simple again, plans, schedules, everyday life. And I noticed something subtle. When they said, that sounds good, it didn't always mean the same thing. Sometimes it meant genuine agreement. Sometimes it meant polite acceptance. And sometimes it meant hesitation. Same sentence, different meaning, depending on tone, timing, facial expression. That's when it clicked. Language is not just words. It's context. And in American culture, context carries a lot of meaning. People often soften their communication. They don't always say exactly what they feel directly. They balance honesty with politeness, clarity with emotional consideration. And if you take words at face value, you might miss what's actually being expressed. That realization changed how I listened. Before, I focused on understanding the sentence. Now, I started paying attention to the feeling behind it. Was the tone light? Was there hesitation? Was the energy open or slightly closed? And suddenly conversations made more sense. Not because my English improved dramatically, but because my awareness did. There's a concept in communication theory called high context versus low context culture. The U.S. is often considered a low context culture, meaning people value directness. But in personal relationships, it becomes more layered. People still expect emotional awareness, sensitivity, the ability to read between the lines just enough. And that balance can feel confusing if you're not used to it. I remember one small situation that would have confused me before. We were deciding on something simple. I suggested an idea. The response was, Maybe we can think about it. Before, I would have taken that literally. Okay, we'll think about it. Neutral. No problem.
But now I paused.
Not because of the words. Because of the tone. It wasn't fully open. There was a slight hesitation. And instead of moving on, I asked, "Do you feel unsure about it?" That question changed everything. Because now we weren't just exchanging words. We were clarifying meaning. And the response came honestly. Yeah, I'm not sure it's the best option.
Simple. Clear.
Real. That moment showed me something powerful. Understanding is not passive. It's active. It requires curiosity. Not just about language, but about people. Another shift happened in how I express myself. Before, I focused on being correct. Now, I focused on being clear. And clarity doesn't mean using more words. It means choosing the right level of honesty. For example, instead of saying, "It's okay," I started saying, "I'm okay with it, but I feel a little unsure." That small addition changes everything. Because now the other person doesn't have to guess. And when people don't have to guess, they feel more secure. There's a psychological principle called uncertainty reduction. It means people naturally try to reduce ambiguity in communication. And when they can't, they fill the gap with assumptions. Sometimes positive, sometimes negative, but almost never accurate. So the more clarity you provide, the less room there is for misunderstanding. And that builds trust. Another thing I began to understand was how emotional expression works differently. In the U.S., people are often encouraged to express how they feel.
Not in a dramatic way,
but in a direct, honest way. I feel this. I need that. I'm not comfortable with this. At first, that felt intense to me, almost too direct. But over time, I saw the value. Because when emotions are expressed clearly, they don't build up silently. They don't turn into confusion or distance. They get addressed. And addressing something early is always easier than fixing it later. That doesn't mean every conversation is easy. It doesn't mean every moment is comfortable. But it means things stay real. And real is what keeps connection alive. Looking back, I realized something important. I wasn't just learning how to speak. I was learning how to understand, not just language, but people. And that's a completely different skill, because you can know thousands of words and still feel disconnected. But if you understand how meaning is built, even simple words can create deep connection. So, if you're in a place where you feel like, I know enough, but something is still missing, maybe it's not about learning more words. Maybe it's about learning how to see more, how to notice tone, how to ask clarifying questions, how to express not just what you think, but what you feel. Because real communication isn't about perfection. It's about alignment between words and meaning, between intention and impact. And the closer those things are, the easier everything becomes. Not perfect, but clearer. And sometimes clarity is all you need to feel connected again. Because the moment you stop trying to just say things right and start trying to truly understand, that's when communication becomes something more. Not a task, not a pressure, but a bridge. One that actually brings people closer. Simple happiness feels different. What if happiness isn't something you achieve, but something you finally notice? Not a big milestone, not a perfect moment, but a quiet realization that things are no longer as heavy as they used to be. Because for the longest time, I thought happiness would feel obvious.
clear, strong,
Undeniable. Something I could point to and say, this is it. But real life, especially the kind you build slowly through effort and small changes, doesn't work like that. Happiness, I learned, often arrives quietly. So quietly, you almost miss it. It didn't happen all at once. There was no single moment where everything suddenly felt perfect.
No dramatic transformation.
Just a series of small, ordinary days that started to feel different. Lighter. One morning I noticed something strange. I woke up and didn't feel that familiar pressure.
No immediate overthinking.
No mental rehearsal of what to say. No quiet tension sitting in the background. Just calm. Not excitement. Not overwhelming joy. Just a simple sense of ease. And at first, I didn't trust it. Because when you've been used to things feeling heavy, lightness feels unfamiliar. Almost suspicious.
Like it won't last. But it did.
Not perfectly. Not every day. But often enough to feel real. That's when I realized something important. Happiness isn't the absence of problems. It's the absence of constant internal resistance. It's when you stop fighting every small moment and start allowing things to be a little easier. There was another moment that made this even clearer. We were sitting together again just like so many times before. Same place. Same routine. But something felt different. The conversation flowed. Not perfectly. Not without pauses. But naturally. I said something simple. They responded. We laughed. And for a second, I paused internally and thought, this used to feel hard. Not the situation, but the feeling, the effort, the pressure. And now it didn't. That's when it hit me. This is what progress looks like when it settles. Not exciting, but stable. There's a concept in psychology called baseline shift. It means your normal emotional state changes over time, based on repeated experiences. What used to feel difficult becomes manageable. What used to feel stressful becomes familiar. And eventually what used to feel impossible feels normal. That's where I was. Not at some perfect destination, but at a new baseline. Where connection didn't require as much effort. Where communication didn't feel like a test. Where being present felt natural. And in that space, happiness started to exist. Not loudly, but consistently. I also started noticing how small moments carried more meaning. A simple, "How was your day?" felt more genuine. A short conversation felt more connected. Even silence felt different. Not heavy. Not uncomfortable. Just peaceful. That's something I never expected. Because before, silence felt like distance. Now it felt like comfort. And that shift alone changed everything. There's another layer to this that most people don't talk about. When things start to feel better, you don't always celebrate. Sometimes you reflect. You look back at who you were and realize how far you've come. Not in a proud, loud way, but in a quiet, honest way. Like, I didn't think I could get here. And that thought carries weight. Because you remember the moments where you almost gave up. The nights where everything felt too much. The conversations you avoided. The feelings you held in. And now you're here. Not perfect, but present. And that's enough. I also started to understand something deeper about relationships. Happiness isn't built on constant excitement. It's built on consistency. On showing up. On small, repeated actions that create trust over time. And trust is what allows happiness to exist. Without it, even good moments feel uncertain. With it, even simple moments feel meaningful. There were still challenges. Still days where things felt off. Still moments of misunderstanding. But they didn't carry the same weight. Because now there was a foundation. A sense that even if things got difficult, we knew how to come back. And that's what makes happiness sustainable. Not perfection, but resilience. The ability to reconnect again and again. Looking back, I used to think happiness would come when everything was solved. When communication was perfect. When there were no misunderstandings. But now I see it differently. Happiness came when I stopped expecting everything to be perfect and started appreciating what was already working. A real conversation, a shared laugh, a moment of understanding. These things are small, but they're not insignificant. They're everything. So, if you're watching this and thinking, I'm not there yet, things still feel hard, I'm still figuring it out, that's okay. Because happiness doesn't require you to be finished. It just requires you to notice what's already changing, even slightly, even quietly. Because the life that once felt impossible might already be becoming real in ways you haven't fully seen yet. And maybe, just maybe, you're closer than you think. Still try, even now. What if the dream that once felt impossible didn't disappear? What if it just changed shape while you were too focused on surviving to notice? Because when I look back now, I don't see one big turning point. I see moments, small ones, quiet ones, moments where I could have stayed the same but didn't, moments where I almost gave up but chose, somehow, to keep going. Not perfectly, just enough. And somehow that was enough to change everything. If you had asked me before, during those heavy days, those silent dinners, those moments of doubt, if I believed things would feel like this, I would have said no. Not because I was negative, but because I couldn't see how. That's the hardest part about anything that feels impossible. It's not just difficult. It's unclear. You don't know what step to take. You don't know what will work. You don't even know if trying again will make a difference. So your mind offers you an easier option. Stop trying. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just slowly. Quietly. But here's what I've learned. Something I wish I understood earlier. You don't need to see the whole path to take the next step. Because clarity doesn't come before action. It comes from action. Every small moment where I chose to say something real, even if it was imperfect. Every time I stayed present, instead of shutting down. Every time I allowed myself to be slightly uncomfortable instead of completely safe. Those moments didn't feel powerful at the time. They felt small, almost insignificant. But together they built something. Something stable. Something real. And now, when I look at my life, not the perfect version, not the imagined version, but the actual, everyday life I'm living, I see something I didn't expect. Not perfection, but peace. Not constant happiness, but steady connection. Not flawless communication, but honest effort. And that is more than I thought was possible. There's something important I want to say to you, especially if you're watching this because something in your life feels stuck, heavy, or uncertain. Maybe it's your relationship. Maybe it's your confidence. Maybe it's your ability to express yourself. Or maybe it's just that quiet feeling that something isn't quite right, and you don't know how to fix it. I've been there, more than once. And if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's this. You don't need to become a different person to create a different experience. You just need to respond differently in small moments. Because your life isn't shaped by big decisions alone. It's shaped by repeated patterns. And patterns can change. Not instantly, but gradually. There's a principle in neuroscience called neuroplasticity. It means your brain is constantly adapting, rewiring itself based on what you do repeatedly. So, every time you choose honesty over silence, every time you choose presence over avoidance, every time you choose to try even when it feels uncomfortable, you are literally changing how your brain works. And over time, that changes how your life feels. That's not motivation. That's biology. So, if you've been telling yourself, I'm just not good at this. I can't change. This is just how I am. That's not fixed. That's just familiar. And familiar can change. But only if you give it something new to work with. Looking back, the biggest shift wasn't in my English. It wasn't in my environment. It wasn't even in the relationship itself. It was in how I showed up. Less guarded, less perfect, more real. And that changed how everything responded to me. Because when you change your energy, your interactions change. When your interactions change, your relationships change. And when your relationships change, your entire experience of life changes. Not overnight, but steadily. And that's the kind of change that lasts. So now, if someone asked me, dreams felt impossible, would you still try? My answer is simple. Yes. Not because I'm sure it will be easy. Not because I know exactly how things will turn out. But because I understand something I didn't before. Trying doesn't guarantee success. But not trying guarantees distance. Distance from growth. Distance from connection. Distance from the life you might actually be able to build. And maybe that life won't look like what you imagined. Maybe it won't be perfect. Maybe it won't be impressive. But it can be real. And real is enough. So if you're at that point right now, standing somewhere between wanting to give up and not wanting to regret it, you don't need a big decision. You just need a small one. One honest sentence. One moment of presence. One choice to stay instead of disappear. And then do it again. Because sometimes the life that once felt impossible doesn't arrive all at once. It builds quietly, through moments you almost ignore, through choices no one sees, through effort that doesn't look impressive, but changes everything. So don't wait for perfect. Don't wait for ready. Don't wait for certainty. Just try. Even now. Especially now. Because this moment, right here, right where you are, might already be the beginning of something you once thought you could never reach. What if the moment you almost clicked away from this video is the same kind of moment where most people walk away from their own life? Not because they're weak, but because they think nothing is changing. But now you know the truth. Change doesn't always look dramatic. Growth doesn't always feel exciting. And the life you're building doesn't need to impress anyone to be real. If something in this story felt familiar, if even one moment made you pause, reflect, or feel understood, then don't ignore that. Because that feeling, that's where your next step begins. You don't need perfect English. You don't need perfect confidence. You don't even need a perfect plan. You just need to keep showing up a little more honestly each day. And if this video helped you see that, even just a little, then stay connected. Because this is not just one story. This is a space where real stories meet real growth, where simple English becomes real connection, and where the moments you almost give up become the moments that change everything. So here's your next step. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next story might be the one that helps you understand something you've been struggling with for a long time. Like this video if you felt something real. Comment one sentence you wish you could say honestly today. Share this with someone who might need to hear it, even if they don't know it yet. Because sometimes one story is enough to change a direction, and the next one might change yours. Stay with me.